This podcast is brought to you by AudioHook, the leading independent audio DSP. AudioHook has direct publisher integrations into all major podcast and streaming radio platforms, providing 40% more inventory than what could be accessed in omnichannel DSPs. What's more, AudioBook has full transcripts on more than 90% of all podcast inventory, enabling advanced contextual targeting and brand suitability. AudioHook is so confident that in addition to CPM buys, they offer the industry's only pay-for-performance option where brands can scale audio and podcasting with peace of mind knowing they are only paying for outcomes. Visit audiohook.com to learn more. That's audiohook.com.
Welcome to the Monopoly Report. The Monopoly Report is dedicated to chronicling and analyzing the impact of antitrust and other regulations on the global advertising economy. If you are new to the Monopoly Report, you can subscribe to our weekly newsletter at monopoly-report.com, and you can check out all of the Monopoly Report podcasts at monopolyreportpod.com. I'm Alan Chapell. This week, my guest is Ari Paparo. I think most of my listeners know Ari from his days at DoubleClick, AppNexus, Beeswax, and now as CEO of Marketecture, the company that owns the Monopoly Report podcast and newsletter. Ari is here to talk about his book, Yield, How Google Bought, Built, and Bullied Its Way to Advertising Dominance. I'm coming at this discussion from what I think is a different perspective than some of the other interviews I've seen Ari do recently. I want to ask some tough questions about Google's various competition cases and see if we can break some new ground. And I'm hoping to ask a question that every privacy and regulatory professional will want to know. Namely, how can we get senior business leaders to pay more attention to regulatory issues? So let's get to it. Hey, Ari, thanks for coming on the pod. How are you, man?
I'm great. It's a little weird to be on this pod as a guest.
Yeah, it feels like the roles have really reversed. It was just literally a year ago today where I think I was on the Marketecture pod. And so, everything has come around full circle, I guess.
I know. And now you're a major podcaster with your own listenership. I'm an author, and it's very complicated, this whole new media environment.
It is, but you seem to be thriving. You seem to be everywhere. That's the comment that I'm hearing from literally everybody. It's like, I'm going to interview Ari, and it's like, oh, well, he's everywhere.
Well, I got to sell some books, man. All modesty goes out the window when you have to sell some books. Like, you want me on Oprah, you want me on like your local bookstore, you want me on your kids programming, whatever. I'm selling some books.
Dude, I'm a former touring musician. Like, if there's ever a thing where you just kind of whore yourself out to anything that can get you a little bit of publicity, you're going to do it.
Yep, I'm going to do the drive-by spot on the morning radio.
Fantastic. So what made you decide to write a book?
I thought it was a good story. That's really the very short answer, which is that the story of sort of the history of ad tech is maybe interesting to, 500 people. And there are some pretty interesting twists and turns. But when you frame it, or when I framed it as, how did Google, which is probably the most important company of my lifetime, it's the Standard Oil of the second half of the 20th century or something like that, or the first half of the 21st. And how did this company that's so important go from literally nothing, they had no advertising business outside of search, to such dominance that they're being broken up by the federal government, they're being sued by state governments, they're being broken up by Europe, they're being sued by Canada, and there are private suits left and right, effectively becoming like big tobacco for advertising. That's an interesting story. And there were people involved. It wasn't just a anonymous march to dominance. There were customers, people at publishers and agencies and advertisers and competitors, all of whom were to some extent collateral damage in that story and have interesting perspectives and stories to tell.
Yeah, I mean, on some level, you're taking a page from Hunter S. Like, it's almost like a gonzo journalism thing where you're part of the story here, right?
I'm not really. I'm like, it's more like Zelig. I'm like in every scene, but I don't have any lines. Especially the first half of the book, which, talks about the invention of the ad exchange and DoubleClick's acquisition by Google. I was there. I mean, I was a VP at DoubleClick and later director at Google, but I wasn't on the sell side. I was on the buy side, meaning the product that used to be called DFA, that's now called GCM. And that was not that involved in these shenanigans. Like, basically the thrust of the story is sell side. It's about taking the monopoly of DFP later GAM, and manipulating that monopoly to the benefit of Google. So even though I was there, I didn't have that much to do with it.
So how deep did you go into the history in your book, and where did it start? Was it just the DoubleClick acquisition, or did it go prior?
Yeah, I did something like 65, 70 in-depth interviews with people in our industry. I also read, has to be 1,000 documents from the court cases, and put together a pretty compelling narrative, as well as, taking contemporaneous reporting from AdX, Digiday, and the rest of the great journalists in our space. So I didn't leave any stone unturned. What I did when I wrote the book is I didn't want it to be history of ad tech. Here, this happened, then there was this guy. That's boring. I wanted to tell stories, and that's where maybe a little bit of the Hunter S. Thompson thing comes in that I use the interviews I did with people to paint the picture about their motivations and what they were doing at the time that moves the story along. And so we're starting with Brian O'Kelly and David Rosenblatt. So everyone knows Brian. Maybe some folks don't know Rosenblatt. He was the CEO of DoubleClick through the acquisition. And this feeling like the invention of the ad exchange was changing everything. And what did that mean? What did it mean to be changing everything? And Rosenblatt at the time says, he was running DoubleClick. It was very successful. And he said, I felt like I was on the bridge of the Titanic clinking my champagne glasses because he knew that this Pandora's box had been opened and Google was coming after them. And so the acquisition, in a sense, was defensive, even though it was quite an eye-popping $3.1 billion. The reality was that the financialization of advertising was going to lead inevitably to the dominance of tech in that space.
And that's really my next line of questions. Because, all right, so there's people in our industry today who have been around a while, a decade or more, who have never known a day when Google wasn't the biggest and baddest cat on the block. And so I'm curious, in your opinion, when did the trajectory here become truly inevitable?
So they acquired DoubleClick, and Neil Mohan is put in charge of the strategy. And I talk about this a lot in the book. He identifies there's a 3-pillar strategy. You have the platform DFP, you have the ad exchange that makes the DFP inventory available for sale, and then you have the ad network, which used to be called the Google Display Network, or GDN. And they got rid of that name at some point. And so in his view, the demand comes from GDN, it gets transactioned to AdX, and it ends up in DFP. And if you do those 3 things, you're going to, build a really big business. I'm not sure dominance is the right word, although some people certainly use that word. You're going to build a really big business. Let's just put it that way. In the transaction, the estimate that Neil and David gave to the potential buyers was that there was approximately $3 billion in synergy per year from acquiring DoubleClick, which is a big number. So when did they become dominant? Well, it wasn't right away, because it's a little hard to remember, but in 2009, 10, right after the deal closed, AdX was tiny, absolutely tiny. There was much more innovation happening from competitors like AdMeld, PubMatic, Rubicon Project were much more advanced than AdX. And really importantly, the Google Display Network was a piece of crap. It didn't have any measurement. It didn't have frequency capping. Can you imagine buying on an ad network that had no frequency capping? So it was a cookieless display ad network. AdSense, the text side, was doing pretty well, but the images were doing terrible. So it was only, a couple of years later, and I don't think there was one announcement you can point at, but sometime in 2013-ish, 12 or 13-ish, when Google got its shit together and the display network was at parity, it was a buyable network. The Salesforce was selling it. AdX was plugged in and was starting to become an obvious leader. They had acquired AdMeld. So they had people on board like Brian Adams, who's currently, I think, the CTO of Spotify, but at the time he was the co-founder of AdMeld, and he was basically telling the Google team what to do, how to build a real exchange that worked with things like private exchanges. That was a big innovation at the time. And lastly, the acquisition of Invite Media, which took place, I guess, in 2010, had been rebuilt as the initial, it was called something else, but what's currently DV360, which gave them a complete package: buy side, middleman, sell side, network, liquidity. So that all kind of gelled in that early part of that decade. And after that, it was game over.
Yeah. And then was it just a matter of they continually them kind of just increasing a stranglehold over the rest of the ecosystem and over time?
Yeah, and the subtitle, my book, which we didn't say the name of the book. Come on, man! It's called Yield: How Google Bought, Built, and Bullied Its Way to Advertising Dominance. And I want to explain why I called it that. So, bought, built, and bullied. I want to give them credit. They bought AdMail, they bought Invite, they bought DoubleClick. They built, like, hundreds of engineering years went into fixing a lot of these old crappy DoubleClick products, the ones that I built, that were just not up to speed for that era. So the investment was heavy, and they deserve credit for that. But then the bullying starts, and you have incremental decisions being made by various people at Google that just hurt competition at every stage. So you have DV360 exclusivity onto YouTube that hits around 2014. That's a death blow for independent DSPs. It's a miracle that DSPs were able to survive that, given how important it was. You have what's called dynamic rev share, which is where Google would manipulate the fees it's charged between buy and sell side to win more. So their auction volume started increasing at the expense of competitors. You had Project Bernanke and Project Bell, which were other auction manipulations to enshrine Google's power. And then ultimately, like around after header bidding comes out, there's all this dirty business around trying to kill header bidding, ends up in exchange bidding, and then ends up in the ultimate like straw that breaks the camel's back of unified pricing rules, or UPR, where it was so blatantly obvious they were working against the interests of their customers that it shocked people.
Okay, so that really leads me, because the bullying part is what the next thing I want to talk about here. So the trial surfaced a bunch of stories documenting, we'll just say, questionable acts, and some of which were conducted by friends of yours. But
former.
Well,
hopefully. No, I sent an email. I'm going to drop here for 1 second. I sent a little text message to my group chat, and I was like, "Hey guys, you all know I wrote a book. You all know what it's about. You're in it, and we have to still be friends after it comes out."
Well, good, and I think that kind of perspective is certainly helpful. It's, I think, better to be more objective than not. But one of the things that I caught from one of the interviews, the thousands of interviews you've done for the book so far, you've gone out of your way to say that Google isn't a bad company. And so help me reconcile, what seem like bad acts, and you've got stories of people being gaslit and companies being strangled. And how do you reconcile those two statements?
I think there are bad behaviors, right? And I think I came away with was that there was pretty widespread arrogance. I think they're certainly guilty of arrogance, undisputedly unanimous verdict of arrogance throughout the company, in that the way they treated their customers was paternalistic. Like, publishers don't know what they're doing. There's a lot of that sentiment in the emails. We'll change the auction because publishers are going to try to get more yield out of it in bad ways that they don't understand their long-term interest. Though that sentiment was widespread inside the company and is really not a good look when those are your customers. There is arrogance in the way the accounts team treated their customers. They treated them like they were lucky to be using this ad server, when in fact they desperately wanted to get off of it and were unable to because it's a monopoly. And then in terms of evil, right? Don't be evil, the famous and very unfortunate motto of the company. They did some things that, if there was a clear sight at a leadership position in the company, they may have chosen not to do. And I think what happened was that a lot of the original double clickers, who were much more empathetic to the media business and understanding of the customers, started to peel off and go to other jobs inside the company or leave. And the folks who took over were much more search types from the West Coast, who were just about making the numbers go up and to the right to get promoted. And you kind of lost track of whether what you were doing was actually a good idea or not. The worst things they did were manipulative. They didn't drive anyone out of business on purpose. They didn't do any things that I would consider like really evil corporate behavior. They did a lot of things that were not to the benefit of their customers, in their own benefit, gaslighting people, telling half truths, and things like that. So that's where I end up, is kind of a moral mixed bag.
And fair enough. And just an observation for me, I was at DoubleClick back in 2001. And my two observations about my time there, by the way, I was a salesperson who could not sell a thing. So take this as this
Were you on
disgruntled
Sonar?
ex-employee.
Wait, hold on. Wait, who did you report to and what did you sell?
I reported to everybody because they kept changing the company every 3 months. But it was Doug Knopper and Tom Fischetta and Gian. So I was in the diameter research business. And the diameter research business was this redheaded stepchild that they did everything they could to make sure we couldn't talk to dart for advertisers. Yeah. Which completely handcuffed our ability to sell the darn thing. All right, but that wasn't my point. And my point was that first, the media side, even back in 2001, really was kept in a different place than the tech side. It culturally, it just felt like there were some people oh yeah, I remember that guy over there. We used to work together, but it felt like they were separate companies. And then the arrogance thing, at least on the tech side, I think was not entirely an invention of Google. I think some of the DoubleClick folks kind of came in with that.
DoubleClick definitely was an arrogant company in the era that you're talking about. I think a lot of it got kind of stamped out because the company had such a bad run in the mid 2000s. Like when I started, the company was publicly traded and was at $5 a share or something. And so some of that got stamped out. But the company always had swagger, and it was just a kind of a different vibe once it had been fully absorbed into Google.
So you went into the ad tech trial as pretty much an expert in ad tech and Google, both from the perspective of understanding how the plumbing really works, but also understanding some of the key business drivers. And so was there anything that came out that really blew your mind? Either about, how the space really worked or about how the cultural mindset of the industry or something else?
Yeah, a couple of things I thought were pretty interesting when we're talking about metrics and economics. The first thing, and I kind of knew this, but it was a little bit shocking. I still think this is an underreported story, is the extent to which AdX is subsidized by the rest of Google. So we think of AdX as more than 50% market share still. It used to be more like 70% before header bidding. And we think of it as this monster business, et cetera, et cetera. But the reality is that more than 60% of the demand on AdX is from Google Ads, meaning AdWords, right? And Google Ads has no choice about where else to buy. So it's a captive customer. And Google Ads made many intentional decisions to overpay AdX to win more on AdX. So if AdX was a standalone and only had one advantage, which would be the DFP integration, and didn't have the other advantage, the buy side, it'd be a tiny business. It wouldn't be dominant at all. And the extent to which it was subsidized is just dramatic. So that was kind of the first interesting point. And that really is relevant when we start talking about remedies, because if AdX gets spun out on its own without the other things, I'm not sure if it's worth anything. The second thing, and this is also it's kind of the same topic in a different sense, is that there was testimony at the trial from the woman who, I forget her name, but the woman who's in charge of finance for the display group. And so display at Google is not a real division. The real division is called network, which is on the financial statements. But they cobbled together sort of a P&L for display, which was like parts of network and parts of non-network, and they subtract YouTube, some complicated internal thing. And she testified pretty clearly that display was not profitable at Google. So we have a monopoly dominant position, over 90% share on the ad server, 50% share on AdX, probably 30 or 40 on DV360, and it loses money, which is just astounding. And she testified more specifically that the only thing that got it close to profitability was the giant upsurge in AdMob, the mobile business during COVID. And so if you fast forward, because the latest data we had from the trial is 2020, the network business has been flat to down since then. Mobile keeps growing. It probably implies that the display business is still quite unprofitable and maybe even declining in size.
Yeah, and that begs the question of why are they holding on to it?
Why are they holding it?
Is it entirely a data play? Is it just that they need that chip because they are negotiating with regulators all around the world around divestment options? And if you get rid of that, they're just going to be, the next question is, great, what else?
I think there's three things. One is what you just said, which is the poker chip. The longer they push this, the network business, the ad tech business, the more value they keep to ultimately settle other things. The second thing is the data. So having tag on the page with effectively every publisher on the internet is very valuable for search, for analytics, for DV360, for AdWords, for all those other things. And we know that's true because when Google tried to get its AdWords bidder to bid on other exchanges, which is a program called AWBid or AWBid, they really struggled to get it to work with other exchanges because they didn't have nearly as good telemetry on fraud and identity and stuff like that. So the tag on the page really matters to a lot of the business. And the third thing is PMAX. PMAX is the growth engine for maybe all of Google. It's taking advertiser dollars and sending it to YouTube pretty aggressively. And I've got to imagine that business benefits in a lot of ways from having that tag on the page and having the demand in GAM and other things like that.
Okay, let's talk remedies. So I'm going to give you two scenarios, and I would love your thoughts on how the marketplace works out. So first scenario is, in both the search and the ad tech case, the DOJ gets everything that they're asking for currently. What does the marketplace look like in 3 to 5 years?
Yeah, so certainly Google's going to appeal. I don't want to go into too much depth on that. But so the DOJ would ask for a Chrome spin out, that Google's restricted in some way on AI data collection, and that in the ad tech case, that DFP and AdX are spun out all separately over time. What does it look like for Google? Well, they're going to lose a big chunk of revenue. Now, a lot of that revenue maybe is a lower margin, so it won't necessarily affect the stock that much. I'm pretty confident Google can manage through it. They might put more and more, they would put more and more of their efforts into YouTube. They'd look a little bit more like Meta does, where Meta spends 99% of its time on its own app and 1% of its time on fan. You could be in a similar situation. I think there's a open, interesting question about whether and how Google thinks about DV360. DV360 is also not profitable and is not subject to the DOJ's remedies. No one's asking them to spin out DV360, but they might choose to, or they might choose to de-emphasize it, or a lot of other things, because it does feel like the odd man out in the Google side of things. How does the world look outside of Google? Well, I think it looks increasingly diverse. I think that you might see in the ad tech side multiple ad servers or ad server-like technologies from companies like Magnite, PubMatic, maybe Microsoft AppNexus, whatever it's called. It starts revitalizing, and publishers have a lot of choices about how they want to manage their businesses. I'd love to see some innovation, not just the same old, but you could have much more aggressive integration of things like native ads, which have always been sort of stymied by the complexity of implementation. So I think that you'd have more variety on the publisher side. The billion-dollar question, though, is, do publishers make more money or not? Because publishers are struggling. A lot of the benefit of the monopoly, Google monopoly, is that ultimately dollars end up on publishers' income statements, and interrupting that flow might not be great. It might involve more friction, less yield, and publishers have enough problems already. So, we'll have to wait and see on that one.
Do you think that if the DOJ gets everything they want, does that hasten Meta's re-entry into the open internet?
Yeah, I've speculated about this before, mainly based on the evidence that in the trial, Meta documents were presented that specifically said they did not want to be in the open internet because Google was intermediating them. And they said there was a slide from Meta that says, no matter what we do, we have to go through Google. And then just about 6 months or a year after that slide, they turned off fan on open web. And so could they re-enter? Yeah, maybe. I don't think it's a top priority, given that there's a secular decline in web-based media. But certainly having Google stop intermediating could be a green light for interested parties, be they TikTok, Microsoft, Meta, or others, to move some of their dollars back to the open web.
Okay, so what does the world look like if Google gets everything that they ask for currently, or they're currently proposing?
Yeah, so Google's remedies are basically forget that we're a monopoly and go back to business. Their counter proposal is like a joke.
I think they're also asking for an apology.
Yeah, an apology, pay their legal fees. I think the world looks pretty bad if Google wins. And the reason is because I fundamentally don't think they really care about this business very much. I think that they're operating the network business as a siphon for dollars to move to YouTube. That's their top priority, and that would continue. And so if you're a publisher who's stuck on their stack, it's a monopoly. They probably are not putting their best people on it. If you were a Google engineer, would you really want to work on the product that already has 90% market share and angry customers? Doesn't sound that appealing. So I think that you would see a slow decline in the quality of the offering and the dollars that were flowing to those publishers. And it still would probably be more of a fair market because I think they would be under so much scrutiny that they wouldn't bother manipulating the market anymore. But effectively, I just don't think they care very much.
Okay, I've got a bit of a therapy question here for you. So I don't know
for me or you.
Really
are you on the couch or am I on the couch?
I'm on the couch here.
Okay.
So Dr. Paparo. So why is it so difficult to get business people in the ad space to focus on regulatory issues?
Well, okay, that's a hard question. First of all, I think there's learned helplessness because I'm coming on 20 years and there's been no legislation. There's been nothing. The government hasn't done a single thing that's helpful to me in the industry. The only thing that's happened in those 20 years is GDPR got adopted, which was an example of bad, overwrought regulation. I'd say good idea, bad implementation. So why should I spend effort or time hoping and wishing that someone in Washington will do something obvious and pass a law? I think people basically gave up.
Okay, but this is separate from the rant around, like, why doesn't DC get its act together and put together a national privacy law? Because even in the absence of that, and we don't even have to talk about the state laws, but like there's Apple ATT, there's all of the shenanigans that Google has instituted in the name of self-regulation over the last 10 to 15 years. There's the DAA and the NAI. So like there's not a lack of things to be talking about and opining on. Nonetheless, I would say that the business community pays at best lip service to this kinds of stuff.
Yeah, maybe we could be more, the business community, if I'm speaking for them, it could be more aggressive. I'm not sure. Besides, we have how many trials going on right now? In New York, there's a multi-party trial against Google on the same grounds being led by Daily Mail and Gannett and others. Rumble tried to sue Google for these same charges and it just got dismissed for other reasons. The state and federal trials against Google were largely instigated by publishers who were tired of what they felt was abusive activities. So the courts have been a pretty active area for all of this. In the non-ad tech world, you have Epic, which effectively broke Apple's monopoly on the App Store, which is a pretty impressive accomplishment. So what's missing? Well, no one went after Apple for ATT. It's a tough case. It's a very tough case. Apple's not a monopoly. They obviously can claim the privacy benefits of that. The sandbox, you've written about this. It was litigated. It was put into the CMA. It was a fight. It just turned out to be a waste of time for everyone involved. So what would you suggest they do?
And that's my question. Is the prevailing sense that a lot of this stuff is ultimately a waste of time and that we just need to get down to business or closing the next quarter's round of business?
I think the ultimate problem that the digital advertising world has is that there are large tech firms with much, much larger balance sheets, like not just much larger, like 100 times larger balance sheets, who largely control the destiny of digital advertising and have either negative or neutral opinions about advertising. And it's pretty difficult to fight against that. In the cases where it's obvious, like in this Google case where they obviously had a monopoly and they're obviously manipulating it, there was a straightforward thing to do. But imagine if the IAB or Jason Kint and his group, because they're more of an advocacy group, they went to Congress and said, you should regulate the browsers. Do you really think that's going to result in anything? The on the other side, you have Google and Apple with sort of unlimited lobbying funds saying oh no, we're innovative. It seems kind of like a dead end.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point. And I might position it a little bit differently. You do have these large tech companies who are able to control the narrative in most of the rooms that they're in. And so diving beneath that is work, and you've already got a job.
Yeah. And these companies, ad tech companies, independent ad tech companies, are just not that big. Like, you think about a big one, like Magnite. I haven't checked recently, but it's single-digit billion market cap, less than 1,000 employees, I think. Just off the top of my head, it's not a very big company to start spending, I don't know, $25 million a year on lobbying. That would be a big expense. That would change its earnings if it did that.
Oh, absolutely. And also, just $25 million is a drop in the bucket. So let's say you put $25 million in there. I don't know what you're getting for that.
Right. So who has the ability to wage these theoretical fights that you're yearning for? It's Google. So Google could have sued Apple on antitrust grounds when ATT came out, or Facebook more likely would have. But they obviously decided not to. I mean, it's not a good look in the public either to be like, no, we want to track users more. That would have been a pretty negative PR cycle for them.
Fair enough. What's working against Apple now, and again, this is just Europe, and so it's just France and Germany, but their competition regulators have pretty much ruled that ATT was an anti-competitive canard.
Good.
And so we'll see where that ultimately goes. But even that, it's sort of like, okay, then what? Do I think that there's a chance that something may happen to Apple where they at least feel less emboldened to, do what they do and stick their middle finger out at everybody? Maybe, but that's one of the challenges.
Yeah, I mean, do you want to go back and start litigating do not track again? Like, this is
that was fun.
It's the exact same argument. Like, industry groups should do something about privacy. Let's do it. Oh, wait, no, big tech giants don't agree with our point of view. Everything goes to shit.
Okay, now we're off at a side argument. We may end up just editing this out. I would just say the W3C is not an industry group. The W3C is a handful of browsers and privacy advocates who decided, in the name of privacy, to do everything they could to stop the ad tech industry from doing almost anything, but nonetheless would not restrict browsers' ability to send Google search data.
Right. So this is so to the extent that there is some theoretical regulatory framework that balances advertising with consumer privacy and with fair dealing in commerce, I think it's pretty far away and would never get to any consensus.
Fair enough. And so I want to shift gears a little bit. And I'm looking forward to the separate state AG case trial later this summer. So I think you just told me you were attending.
I'm tentatively, like, the idea of going to Texas on August 11th for a week is really unattractive, but I think I'm going to do it. And there's some funny emails going around where the various reporters in our space are all emailing each other like, are you going? Like, where are you staying? Where is Plano? It's very under the radar.
Yeah. I don't have the attention span to go. I mean, honestly, you and Ariel and Megan Gray, mad props to all three of you, because to be able to sit in a room like that and come out with anything coherent, I'd be songwriting or like setting notes to my wife or something. Like, I don't know how. There's just a lot going on there that you're paying attention to. So
no, kudos. I like that sort of thing. I think I'm really interested in this case because I think it's going to be a lot more red meat than the federal case. By all indications, the attorneys general, especially Texas, they just want blood. And there's absolutely a political angle to this story. Like, there is not a coincidence this is happening in a red state, and they're going for blood. So I want to get some of that red meat. It's like a UFC for ad tech.
Well, yeah, UFC is a really good analogy because if you have any experience watching how things work in Washington, D.C., that is a gentle person's forum. You go into some of those states and they're going to start throwing elbows. And
it's a jury trial too. So they're going to try to make it as dramatic as possible to influence the jury. Also, it's very important to note that, like, the DOJ left out the auction manipulation parts of the trial. They intentionally did not include any auction manipulation in the trial, whereas Texas is very focused on that.
In addition to manipulation, do you see any other potential bombshells?
Well, there's some debate about whether Jedi Blue is in or not, or out of this Texas trial. And it's really complicated, and everyone seems to have an opinion about whether Jedi Blue, meaning the pact between Google and Facebook, will be adjudicated, and what sort of details, and whether we'll hear from people like Zuckerberg and Sandberg and stuff like that. So that's an interesting angle. I personally, now I'm editorializing, but I personally think Jedi Blue is not a big deal at all. I think it's just a total canard and not important, but it would make good trial drama.
Well, why not? Walk me through that.
So Jedi Blue was an agreement where Facebook would agree to start bidding into Google's open exchange system and paying them a fee, so a 5% fee. And in exchange, they got certain guarantees from Google really about the quality of the auctions, like how often the user ID would be present in the auction, that sort of thing. And the interpretation that's very negative is that this was a collusion between two giant companies to corner the market, and there was a quid pro quo where Facebook agreed not to build its own header bidding solution. That's like the most negative thing you could say about Jedi Blue. In my opinion, first of all, the agreement has no evidence that there was a quid pro quo. There's an email from a Meta executive that says something like, well, it's obvious what they want. They want us to stop building header bidding. Okay, great. That's an email internal between Meta people chatting about Google's motivations. It's not a smoking gun. So that's the first thing. There, no smoking gun. Secondly, the various provisions in this agreement that get people worked up, like the minimum percentage of auctions that have IDs and the minimum payments from Facebook, they just strike me as ordinary course of business, SLA type things. Why would Facebook agree to pay them a minimum amount of money unless they knew there's going to be a minimum number of IDs? It's like pretty straightforward. And the fact is, it was just bigger than any other deal either company had ever done, meant that there was more and more protections in it. So I think this is a nothing burger, basically.
Well, since we're talking about Meta, have you been following the FTC antitrust trial against Meta?
Yeah, indirectly. I haven't been there, but I've been following it.
It feels like Google's trial has probably taken up, at least in the ad space, it's taken up a bunch of the oxygen in the room.
Well, I think it's a much more damning set of facts than the Meta case. The Meta case is 15-year-old behaviors and seems just, in my opinion, again, seems just like really out of touch.
Well, yeah, that's going to be the struggle, I think, for the FTC. On the other hand, when you have emails from the CEO saying, oh my God, we're getting killed by these guys. We better buy them so as we don't have to compete with them anymore.
Yeah, those aren't the
best. So normally on Let's Pod, I ask one final question about what your super secret hobby or passion is. But I already know it for you because you're writing books.
All right. So it's called Yield, and it is available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, anywhere else you want to buy a book. Audiobook as well. It's not up yet. It comes out August 5th. So anytime between now and August 5th, you can pre-order the book, audiobook, etc. People keep asking me if I'm going to sign it. The answer is absolutely. You buy it, I'll sign it. But no free books.
Fair enough. Well, I'll just say I have a pretty strong regulatory audience, most of whom struggle to figure out how ad tech works. So, folks, if you're looking for a book to help you understand how the ad tech space works, pick up Yield.
Yeah, and it's a good read. It's like entertaining. It's not entirely technical by any means. I think it's a great book to, if someone is in the advertising business but not an expert, this is a great book for them.
All right. Ari Paparo and Yield, thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
That was a great conversation. It was helpful to hear Ari's thoughts about how the Google trials will impact the ad space and why Google hasn't already exited from its network business, which continues to be a low profitability but high risk endeavor. One thing that I can say about the ad space from a regulatory perspective, the rules that govern our space make absolutely no logical sense at times. And the only way to get your head around some of the arcane rules around here is to understand the history. Ari's book Yield provides what I believe is a compelling narrative of the space and helps understand how we got here and why. I recommend buying a copy and adding it to the summer reading list. We have a bunch of other fantastic guests coming up on the Monopoly Report podcast over the next few weeks. Please subscribe to the show at monopolyreportpod.com or on Spotify, Apple, YouTube, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. And thanks for listening.
Thank you for listening to the Marketecture Podcast. New episodes come out every Friday, and an insightful vendor interview is published each Monday. You can subscribe to our library of hundreds of executive interviews at marketecture.tv. You can also sign up for free for our weekly newsletter with my original strategic insights on the week's news at news.marketecture.tv. And if you're feeling social, we operate a vibrant Slack community that you can apply to join at adtechgod.com.